Many murders occur with the influence of the internet, but is Sharee Miller the first woman to kill with the help of the World Wide Web? Recently wed to a successful businessman named Bruce, she had grown bored with his long and busy work schedule. So when he bought her a shiny new thing known as a personal computer, he had hoped it would help keep her happy. However, unknown to him, Sharee had learned of the new social messaging program AOL, and as she learned how to speak to strangers over the internet, her intentions moved from friendship to lust. She began to see men's affection towards her as a mere game, and in her own words, saw them as video game levels. But one particular man's love was not enough. She wanted to see how far he would go for her, with her final demand coming at the cost of not one, but multiple lives. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the manipulative case of Sharee Miller. Now, the early days of the internet can universally be considered as terrifying. All you have to do is look at the likes of Facebook, Bebo, MySpace, and even early YouTube to see that. However, would you ever think that in its true infancy, the internet would play host to an entirely greed-driven murder? Before we sink our teeth into this one, and just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that does sound like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Sharee Miller. Welcome to the Wolverine State, folks, or for all of you international viewers, welcome to Michigan. Today, we're near the Motor City, also known as Detroit. It is put on the map for a variety of reasons, including being the home of Eminem and the Red Hot Chili Peppers frontman Anthony Kiedis. With the Detroit Pistons on the basketball court and the Red Wings on the ice, there is no shortage of interest to be found for those who are interested in sports. The more historically minded might be more curious to see the Henry Ford Museum of Innovation, or Soo Locks, where more than 10,000 ships pass through every single year. Focusing on our case today, we're honing into the city of Flint, located in Genesee County. It is found 66 miles southwest of Detroit, and the name may very well sound familiar. In the year of 2014, Flint saw a public health crisis, when high levels of lead contaminated the population's water supply, of course, thus triggering a local emergency. And although contaminated waters may have been a good excuse for the perpetrator's actions in today's case, it actually happened several years prior. But first, we must wind the clocks back to the 50s to meet our main man, Bruce. Bruce Miller was born in Flint on July 26, 1951. In his young adult years, he used to work at General Motors as a mechanic, before finally quitting to run his own scrapyard full-time. His business, which was named B&D Auto Parts, was located around 7 miles from his home. Working with cars, it is no surprise that, outside of work, he was interested in motorsports such as NASCAR and racing. And it seemed like every element of his life revolved around vehicles in some way or another. Despite the nature of his job leading him to carrying large amounts of cash and dealing with people from all walks of life, Bruce was considered to be a well-liked man and was very generous. Saying that, there were some ongoing investigations with the police after Bruce was caught tampering with some vehicle VIN numbers, but otherwise, he had never been in any real trouble with the police. Bruce was quite the romantic too, and found himself dating several women throughout his adult years. And although he would marry, this would lead to divorce twice. Now, unfortunately, we don't know too much about his previous partners. However, he would eventually meet a very important person to our case today, and her name was Sharee Kidley. Also born in Flint, Michigan, Sharee was born on October 13th, 1971, and by her account had a pretty tough upbringing. Her mother went through men quite quickly, and would regularly have them passing through her trailer park home where they lived. Sadly, it is alleged that some of these men would also assault Sharee, starting from the very tender age of just 3 years old. Sharee's first marriage, which was at the age of 17, understandably failed. She would then marry again shortly afterwards, but this too fell apart, and needless to say, her life seemed to be relentlessly turbulent. Strange side note for a second, but Sharee liked to go by several names at the time. This includes Sharee Duval, Sharee Tribby, Sharee Paulette Duval, Sharee Paulette Kidley, and Sharee Paulette Tribby. At the young age of 26, Sharee was 20 years Bruce's junior, close to double her age in fact. and after meeting at a local event, she started working for him at his scrapyard, helping him with the general admin tasks required to run his business. Now, when she started working for Bruce, Sharee was already a single mother with 3 children, and in her spare time, she would sell cosmetics for Mary Kay as a side business. And although she began her time with him by doing his bookkeeping, that wouldn't be the only thing of his that she would get to know more intimately. At first, their work relationship remained strictly professional, but as the time passed by, Bruce and Sharee found themselves slowly falling for each other. This eventually resulting in the two getting married in Vegas in April 1999. As expected, and due to running his own scrapyard business, Bruce was often away from the family home. Sharee always helped out in the yard and looked after the kids while he was away. But as expected, this sometimes left her feeling both bored and alone. In an effort to combat her loneliness, Bruce decided to buy her a computer and then hook the family house up to this new strange system called the internet. Back in the day, it was still a relatively new system. The World Wide Web really was in its infancy, and platforms like AOL were only just getting started. And so, after being hooked up, Sharee found herself joining AOL chat rooms to keep herself entertained while Bruce was busy in the yard. Sharee admitted that she would barely get away from the computer. She spent absolutely hours on these chat rooms, speaking to total strangers online. And eventually, these conversations became more saucy. For Bruce, he seemed to enjoy the stability of his marriage. I don't think it's something he ever got before this. To add to that, he was probably quite flattered to get the attention of someone much younger than him. To be honest, it is probably why he put up with so many terrible habits and behaviours. According to acquaintances, Sharee often flirted and acted single online, and the sources available are rather split on if Bruce knew about this or even how much he cared. Now, it was in his interest not to rock the boat too much. He loved his wife and the stable marriage she maintained, and was working towards adopting her 3 children. Now, this was in Sharee's interest too. I mean, she clearly loved his money and the lifestyle it could provide for her. I do say this because not long after they tied the knot, she maxed out several of his credit cards. And even if it did bother him, he didn't complain or even let it show. To put things short, their relationship was wild. They would be business owners in the daytime, managing both the scrapyard and cosmetic side business. And after sunset, they would, quote, do it naughty at night. It was against this background of relative marital bliss that Sharee's online world began to form, and as her confidence on AOL grew, so did her spiciness. Most of her conversations were with men, and most of them turned highly suggestive. To be honest, it is no surprise why. Her various usernames included Horny7421, Love Me Slowly, and I Want to Be Laid. Through her online escapades, she remained totally disloyal to her various connections. She constantly latched on to new men when she got bored, beginning the flirtatious cycle over and over again. And in her own words, she described her actions as just messing around online just to figure out something new to do. Perhaps a slightly more sinister undertone, but she also described her online actions in the following way. It was like a video game, and each man in each relationship was another level to me, and each level was harder. It was seeing how much I could get away with, how much I could make somebody believe. And this cold-hearted way of thinking would send Sharee on a very dark path. It was during one of her marathon internet sessions that Sharee met a new user who went by the name of Reno Nudes. This was the screen name of Jerry Cassady, a former police officer living in Reno, Nevada. Within a very short amount of time, Sharee and Jerry had fallen for each other. It seemed like Jerry was very special too, because not long after flirting began, they changed their names to match one another, Sharee naming herself as Jerry's Fool, and Jerry as Sharee's Fool. Their online conversations included the full spectrum of content, from flirting, nudes, and sexually charged emails, all the way to videos of Sharee performing explicit actions on herself. And remember, all of this happened in 1999, so the process she had to go through to do this was pretty cumbersome. Born on October 6, 1960, Jerry was raised in Kansas City, Missouri. From a very young age, he was an avid hunter. He also had ambitions to join the FBI, a dream that he worked towards by joining the police force in Montana. Jerry worked for 9 years as a homicide detective, rising through the ranks to lieutenant. However, towards the end of his career, it all seemed to go wrong. While working on one of the cases, Jerry discovered some falsified documents in the department. Clearly, this was an inside job where someone had tampered with the information. And so, Jerry did what every good cop should do. He reported it to his boss. But sadly, everyone in the department found out, and he became known as a whistleblower. And just like that, his career was put up in flames. Colleagues made it clear that he was no longer wanted there, and after being demoted, he then decided to leave his job in 1994. Unfortunately, this led Jerry down a very dark path. He began to abuse alcohol and drugs and found himself battling depression. And not long after this, his wife divorced him, which also led to him losing visitation rights to their son. Eventually, Jerry got his life back together, starting work as a security officer at Harrah's North Kansas City Casino and Hotel. By the year 1999, he had moved to Reno and began to work at another one of their casinos. It was during this time that Jerry found Sharee online. How do you do quickly became what are you wearing? And soon after, they moved their relationship from the internet into the real world. Using her cosmetic side hustle as an excuse, Sharee often flew out to Reno to see him, with her first trip happening only 3 months after marrying Bruce. And rather than treat this as a passion-filled affair, she saw all of it as a sadistic game. Sharee's effect on Jerry became very obvious to those who knew him. People described Jerry as almost bipolar during this time. He was very ecstatic when she was in town, and morbidly depressed when she was away. It didn't take long for the evil manipulation to begin either. By September, she claimed that she was pregnant with his child, when, in reality, she wasn't pregnant at all. But just as fast as she claimed pregnancy, she also claimed to have had a miscarriage. And the reason for this? Apparently, Bruce had beaten her up. In reality, none of this had happened. Bruce was a hard-working family man, not some sort of dangerous psychopath that Sharee had made him out to be. But Jerry didn't know that, and he was absolutely furious. To him, the loss of his unborn child and his love being in an abusive marriage was all too much to bear. But it wasn't all that easy, according to Sharee. She told him that Bruce had very powerful connections in the mafia, and he had too much money and influence to ever let them walk away. Just 1 month later, she was supposedly pregnant again. However, this time, it was with twins, and she had scans to prove it. Just a side note, but in 1995, Sharee had tubal ligation, meaning she could no longer have kids. Of course though, she didn't tell Jerry this. But disaster was about to allegedly strike again, because on November the 5th, 1999, Jerry found a chilling email in his inbox. And this email was apparently from Bruce. The email read, "Sharee is growing fat with 2 bastards in her. She has decided she doesn't like the excess weight and is going to get an abortion." In a panic, Jerry tried his hardest to get in touch with Sharee. Filled with worry, he received an email from her later that day saying that she was going away for a few days and would speak with him shortly. The very next day, another email from Bruce landed in his inbox. This one said, "Well, Jerry, she told me to let you know that she would be home soon. I think the abortion went fine. She sounded like she felt better knowing she wasn't having any more kids. Thank you for making my relationship with my wife better." After receiving staged photos of Sharee covered in bruises, Jerry slipped into an uncontrollable rage. This was the last straw for him, and so he began to formulate a plan. After re-establishing contact with Sharee on the next day, November the 8th, the two spoke about what they believed was the only solution to their problem. And although any normal or more rational couple would consider taking this case to the police, as you can likely guess, these two didn't. And the answer to their problem? Well, murder. When planning how to confront Bruce, they strategized directions, parking locations, and even the best place and time to enter the scrapyard. And in a growing surge of rage, Jerry then made the long drive from his home to Michigan. It was later that evening, as Bruce was preparing to close up the yard, that he received a phone call from Sharee. As part of her plan with Jerry, she called him to ask if he could grab a pizza before he came home. And after a few minutes of talking to him, that is when the line suddenly went dead. Jerry had pulled up outside of the scrapyard office, entered through the back door, raised his 20-gauge shotgun to Bruce, before finally pulling the trigger. He then made his way back home. Sharee waited a while until she started the next part of the plan. She called Bruce's brother, Chuck, to ask him if he had seen him. Bruce hadn't returned home yet, and she was getting quite worried. Chuck and his wife then travelled to the scrapyard, which, of course, is when they horrifyingly found Bruce's body. The couple then dialed 911 immediately.
County 911.
Yeah, I need please an ambulance at B&B auto salvage. My brother-in-law owns it, and he's laying on the floor, and there's blood.
Okay, is he breathing?
I don't think so.
Where is he bleeding from?
It looks like from the head, and he's cold.
He's cold?
He's stiff, yeah. She said there's no pulse.
Chuck and his wife were distraught, and apparently Sharee was too. However, despite the quick discovery of the crime scene, no signs or evidence of the suspect was left behind. The killing went unsolved in the immediate aftermath, and at the time, there were no signs that Sharee had anything to do with her husband's murder. No forensic evidence was left at the scene, and it is quite likely that the reason for this is because of Jerry's intimate knowledge of homicide investigations. It was noted that Bruce's wallet was missing, and this was likely taken by Jerry in an effort to dupe police that this was a robbery. And get this, but officers even suspected the wrong person. An old friend of Bruce's named John Hutchinson, and he found himself directly under the spotlight. Not only was John a former employee who owed his boss more than $5,000, but he was also Sharee's ex-partner. To add to this, he had a weak alibi and he failed a lie detector, so it is no wonder why police had their suspicions. As a result, he was interrogated before all of his guns were seized, but with no concrete evidence, he was eventually let go. And after that, the case went cold. Even if Sharee's behaviour following her husband's death was deemed as appropriate by officers, many eyebrows were raised when she was seen out partying shortly after his murder. With thanks to a life insurance payout, the quick sale of his business, and their joint bank accounts, Sharee had a substantial amount of money to burn, and apparently, it seemed like she was in a hurry to do so too. In between all of the dancing, drinking, and cash splashing, she also invited her new boyfriend to the home that she once shared with Bruce. But rather surprisingly, it wasn't Jerry. Jerry and Sharee's relationship suddenly froze after Bruce's murder, and that is when Jerry realized that she had fallen in love with yet another man. Jerry began to feel intense guilt after this, and reflected on the horrific crime he had committed with his ex-lover. With his background in law enforcement, he was well placed to review and realize the truth. Unfortunately, he was merely a pawn in her game, and his emotions were manipulated in order to kill her husband. And that is when he suddenly realized that Bruce was in fact an innocent man, not guilty of any of the accusations that Sharee had fabricated. There was no abuse, no mafia connections, no beatings, and no babies either. And it turns out that the scans Sharee had as so-called proof were dated back in 1994. 3 months later, on February the 11th, Jerry Cassady made the decision to take his own life. He was found alone in the apartment he had rented from his cousin, next to his .22 caliber rifle. Amongst his possessions were letters to his family, including a note and a briefcase which were addressed to his attorney, John P. O'Connor. Upon opening the briefcase, his attorney found clear evidence of the crime, therefore sealing Sharee's own fate from beyond Jerry's grave. And alongside the myriad of evidence, one note from Jerry read, "I drove there and killed him. Sharee was involved and set it all up. I have all the proof and I'm sending it to the police. She will get what's coming. I have been so stupid, but now you know the real story of why I went into such a state of depression. Because I just couldn't tell anyone the truth. She wanted all the money and no more husband. Well, she got her wish, but she is soon to learn that she can't do that to people. Now I know it was all lies and games from Sharee. She didn't care what it took or who she hurt to get what she wanted." Following this shocking discovery, Sharee was quickly arrested and charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Her trial began 10 months later on December the 12th. And with the strange internet-based nature of her crime, public interest was abnormally high. She proclaimed her innocence throughout her trial, with her defense team suggesting that Jerry had fabricated his evidence against her because he couldn't handle his own guilt. They also tried to pin the blame on John again. Poor guy. During her trial, 2 officers role-played the chat logs of Jerry and Sharee. The chat logs, which were recorded on the day of the murder, said, "Jerry, I'm scared. If this don't work, he will hurt me bad. It will work. What is the fastest way into the yard from 75? 75 to Mount Morris Road exit. Listen to me. I'll call Bruce at 5 PM. Okay, is the gun loud? Somewhat. Just do it and get the hell out of there. I want him to know who I am. Jerry, please. He will know, but not for long. Are you going to be able to live with this for the rest of your life? Because I can. I love you. Yes, I can. It was noted that, just one day after murdering her husband, Sharee called America Online to change her first name, last name, and street address. And after she learned that Jerry had taken his own life, she did the exact same thing again. To no one's surprise, this case was a slam dunk in court. And after just 2 days of deliberation, the jury came back with their verdict. Sharee Miller was found guilty of the second-degree murder of her husband. And on January the 9th, 2001, she was sentenced to life in prison. Sharee's defense had several complaints about the trial, one of them being well-founded. It was argued whether Jerry's letter could be used as admissible evidence by the prosecution. And surprisingly, this concern held so much weight that 7 years later, in 2008, the judge ordered a retrial. As a result, a federal court judge ordered that Sharee was released from prison in July 2009 until her retrial. For more than 3 years, she walked the streets without any restrictions whatsoever, and was even allowed to use the internet and dating websites. Understandably, many people were furious, especially the families of Bruce and Jerry. They all felt that she'd been let off the hook due to some ridiculous technicality. But thankfully, in August of 2012, the district court reversed that decision, and as a result, Sharee was sent back to prison and has been there ever since. During her freedom, Sharee had the time to reconnect with her then teenaged children. It does seem that some positivity came out of her freedom here, because through their special time, she realized that her actions had robbed other families of this feeling of reconnection. In April of 2016, Sharee made a 4-page letter confessing that she was, in fact, guilty of orchestrating the murder, which was something that, to this point in time, she had absolutely denied. She claimed that the reason it took so long for her to admit guilt, which essentially waived her right to ever appeal again, was that at the time of her initial trial, she was being advised not to admit it. Her attorneys have unequivocally denied this. Had they known that she was actually guilty, they would have advised her to accept the 15-year plea bargain that she was offered. And just for reference, she has now been behind bars for more than 20. Despite remaining in prison, Sharee has still managed to get married for a 4th time. This was to a man named Michael Denoyer, who saw her story on the news and became obsessed with her. He even proposed to her the very first time they met. Now, theoretically, this case could be known as the first online murder, or at least the first murder to occur through instant messaging like AOL. Arguably, this is the first time that chat rooms and the internet became the focal point of a murder case. Which is quite interesting when you think about it, because nowadays it happens much more often. In the early days of the internet, most people didn't realise how permanent their messages were. For example, with Sharee, she had no idea they were recoverable. It also showed the true danger of chatting to strangers online, and how much it could affect your life, or even your death. Bruce Miller was the victim of these realizations, a man who lost his life through no fault of his own. He found love with Sharee only after employing her, and to begin with, he was merely helping a single mother of 3 children. When they fell for each other nearly 2 years later, he was absolutely smitten. He agreed to legally adopt all 3 children and give them a home. All in the meanwhile, Sharee was sleeping with other men behind his back. Although Sharee's computer would be considered prehistoric in today's world, it would have been extraordinarily expensive at the time. Despite the heavy price tag, Bruce bought this for his wife, under the impression that she would use it to better her business and keep her happy. At best, it was a boutique business, but in reality, it was probably a money-losing operation or a pyramid-type scheme. Yet, despite this, Bruce paid out to make it easier for his wife to sell her products, but instead, she was using it to plan his death. She had already realized that divorce would not provide her with enough money, so she played with the feelings and emotions of a gullible man to do her bidding. And although Jerry is not innocent himself, he too got burned. Bruce was a good man who worked hard at his job and did everything in his power to make his new wife happy. He provided stability, financial security, and unconditional love. But sadly, his reward to all of this was murder in cold blood. And so, to conclude folks, be careful who you speak to on the internet. And I think that pretty much wraps up my case today. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you enjoyed this case or found it interesting, please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. What are your thoughts on this case, by the way? I mean, it is pretty obvious why Sharee's behind bars, but do you think she should have got life? And what do you think about Jerry? Please do let me know in the comment section down below. Just a quick reminder that if you want to get early access to my videos, please check out my Patreon, and if you want to follow me on my adventures, please check out my Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And that is pretty much it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.